It was a cold, misty morning in Denver, Colorado, when the unthinkable happened. Nestled in the affluent Cherry Creek neighborhood, St. Andrew's Medical Center stood as a symbol of modern luxury healthcare. Gleaming glass facades, perfectly manicured gardens, and round-the-clock valet service. St. Andrew's catered to the elite, treating their patients with privacy, state-of-the-art facilities, and an air of exclusivity that rivaled a five-star resort. Inside, doctors in pristine white coats hurried from room to room, while patients lounged in suites that felt more like high-end apartments than hospital rooms. The hospital was bustling as usual that Thursday morning. Dr. Emily Carter, a compassionate but overworked pediatric oncologist, had just arrived for her shift. Her coffee sat untouched on her desk, her mind already preoccupied with the day's challenging cases. Across the hallway, Liam Howard, the hospital's security guard, adjusted his cap and leaned back in his chair, flipping through the day's incident reports. He had worked at St. Andrews for over 10 years and had seen his share of oddities: stubborn paparazzi, eccentric VIPs, and the occasional raccoon wandering in from the nearby park, but nothing could have prepared him for what was about to unfold. At exactly 7:42 a.m., a maintenance worker frantically burst into the security office, his face pale and eyes wide with panic. "Liam, you need to come outside. Right now," he stammered, pointing towards the hospital's eastern garden. Liam frowned, setting down his coffee. "What is it? Another raccoon?" he asked casually. The worker shook his head, barely able to speak. It's a tiger." Liam's heart skipped a beat. "A tiger? You're joking, right?" But the fear in the worker's eyes was undeniable. Grabbing his radio, Liam called for backup and rushed outside. By the time he reached the garden, a small crowd of hospital staff had already gathered, frozen in disbelief. There, on the neatly trimmed grass, stood a Bengal tiger. Its massive golden body was striped with bold black lines that rippled as it moved, and its piercing amber eyes scanned the group of humans with an intensity that sent shivers down their spines. The tiger didn't roar or growl. Instead, it paced back and forth, its tail swishing behind it like a pendulum. It looked neither aggressive nor frightened, just purposeful, as if it were searching for something. Emily, who had come outside to investigate the commotion, stood at the edge of the crowd, her medical instincts overriding her fear. "Is it injured?" she whispered to a nurse beside her. From this distance, she couldn't tell. The situation quickly escalated. Liam radioed animal control, who estimated they'd arrive in 40 minutes. Denver police were en route as well, but in the meantime, hospital staff were instructed to stay indoors, lock the doors, and avoid sudden movements. However, the tiger didn't seem interested in attacking anyone. It walked calmly toward the hospital's main entrance, its massive paws padding silently across the pavement. It paused at the glass doors, peering inside as though it understood what lay beyond them. The crowd gasped as the automatic doors slid open. The tiger stepped inside. Inside the hospital, chaos erupted. Patients and staff scrambled for safety, ducking into rooms and locking themselves inside. Liam and his team of security guards cautiously followed the tiger, their radios crackling with updates. "It's heading toward the children's wing," someone said, their voice shaking. Emily's heart sank. "No," she muttered under her breath, already moving. The children's wing housed some of the hospital's most vulnerable patients, kids battling cancer, chronic illnesses, and rare diseases. The thought of a tiger loose in those hallways was unbearable. But something about the tiger's demeanor gave Emily pause. It wasn't acting like a wild animal on the loose. It wasn't hunting or lashing out. It was searching. Its movements were deliberate, almost methodical, as if it had a destination in mind. Emily's curiosity overrode her fear. Grabbing a medical kit and a tranquilizer syringe from a nearby station, she cautiously followed the tiger. The tiger turned down a corridor, its massive frame brushing against the walls. It stopped in front of a closed door, room 315. Emily froze. Room 315 belonged to a boy named Oliver, one of her most challenging and heartbreaking cases. At only 6 years old, Oliver was battling an aggressive form of leukemia. He had been in and out of the hospital for nearly a year, and despite Emily's best efforts, his prognosis was grim. He rarely had visitors, as his parents worked multiple jobs just to afford his care. The tiger sat down outside Oliver's door, its tail curling around its paws. For a moment, it simply stared at the door, as if waiting for someone to let it in. Emily's pulse quickened. Was this some bizarre coincidence, or was it something more? Against her better judgment, she stepped forward, her trembling hands gripping the tranquilizer syringe. The tiger's head turned toward her, its amber eyes locking onto hers. She froze, expecting it to lunge or roar, but instead, it simply blinked, calm and unthreatening, her breath caught in her throat. It wasn't just looking at her, it was pleading. At that moment, Oliver's voice echoed faintly from inside the room. "Tiger?" he called out, his small voice filled with wonder. Emily's stomach dropped. How did Oliver know? The air in room 315 felt heavy with silence, save for the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor beside Oliver's bed. The boy lay pale and frail, his bald head barely rising from the pillow as he stared at the ceiling. At 6 years old, Oliver had already endured more than most people faced in a lifetime: relentless chemotherapy, invasive procedures, and countless sleepless nights filled with pain. But through it all, Oliver remained oddly serene, as if he knew something the rest of the world didn't. "Tiger?" he called again, his voice weak but insistent. Emily hesitated outside the door, her heart racing as she turned back to the tiger sitting in the hallway. Its piercing eyes met hers again, and something about the depth in its gaze sent chills down her spine. It wasn't just an animal, it felt aware. Summoning every ounce of courage, Emily slowly opened the door to Oliver's room. The tiger didn't move, but its ears perked up. The boy's eyes widened when he saw Emily standing there, and a faint smile curved his lips. "Dr. Carter?" he whispered. "Did you see it? The tiger's here." Emily's mouth went dry. "Oliver, how did you know about the tiger?" she asked gently, stepping closer to his bedside. The boy's smile grew, a rare flicker of life lighting up his face. "I dreamed about him," he said simply. "He's my friend. I knew he'd come." Emily felt a lump form in her throat. The rational part of her mind screamed that this was impossible. A tiger wandering into a hospital in Denver? A sick child dreaming about it before it arrived? It defied all logic. And yet the tiger was here, sitting outside Oliver's door as if it had been summoned by the boy himself. The sound of approaching footsteps broke her train of thought. Liam appeared in the doorway, his face pale and slick with sweat. "Dr. Carter," he whispered urgently. "Animal control is 5 minutes out. They're bringing tranquilizers. We need to clear this area now." "No!" Oliver's voice, though faint, was filled with desperation. "Don't hurt him, please." His small hands gripped Emily's sleeve with surprising strength, his wide, tear-filled eyes begging her to intervene. "He's not going to hurt anyone. He came for me." Emily glanced back at the tiger, still sitting motionless in the hallway. It made no effort to enter the room, but its presence was undeniable, almost protective. Against her better judgment, she placed a calming hand on Liam's arm. "Wait," she said firmly. "We don't know why it's here, but it hasn't hurt anyone. Let's not escalate things until we have to." Liam looked at her like she'd lost her mind. "Emily, it's a tiger, a wild animal. It doesn't matter if it seems calm now. This is dangerous." "I know," she replied, her voice steady. "But look at it, Liam. It's not behaving like a wild animal. It's different. Just give me a little more time." Liam hesitated, glancing between Emily, Oliver, and the tiger. Finally, he sighed and stepped back. "You've got 10 minutes, he muttered. "After that, I can't stop animal control." Emily knelt beside Oliver's bed, her mind racing. "Oliver," she said softly, "why do you think the tiger came for you?" The boy's eyes shone with an innocence that cut through Emily's skepticism. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I dreamed about him every night. In the dreams he tells me not to be scared. He says he's here to take care of me." Emily's throat tightened. She wanted to dismiss his words as the imaginings of a sick child, but deep down she couldn't shake the feeling that there was something extraordinary happening. "What else does he say in your dreams?" she asked. Oliver hesitated, his gaze dropping to the blanket in his lap. He says it's okay to let go, that he'll take me somewhere where I won't be sick anymore." A sharp pain stabbed Emily's chest. She had spent months fighting for Oliver's life, doing everything in her power to keep him alive. The thought of him giving up, even if it brought him peace, was unbearable. Tears stung her eyes, but she forced herself to smile. "That's just a dream, sweetheart," she whispered, stroking his hand. "We're going to keep fighting, okay? You're not going anywhere." But as the words left her mouth, Emily knew they weren't entirely true. Oliver's body was failing, and no amount of medical intervention could change that. She had seen it in his blood work, his scans, the way his tiny frame seemed to grow weaker every day. He didn't have much time left. Outside, the tiger let out a low, rumbling sound, not a roar, but a deep, resonant purr that seemed to vibrate through the walls. Oliver's face lit up. "He's singing," he said softly, his voice filled with wonder. Emily's head snapped toward the door. "Singing?" She rose to her feet and stepped into the hallway, her heart pounding. The tiger turned its gaze to her, its amber eyes glowing with something she could only describe as understanding. Slowly, deliberately, it stood and began walking down the corridor. "Where is it going?" Liam asked, his voice tight with nerves. "I don't know," Emily replied, her feet already moving to follow. She didn't understand why, but she felt compelled to go after it. The tiger moved with purpose, its massive frame cutting a surreal figure against the sterile hospital walls. It led her down a series of hallways, past startled nurses and gaping patients, until it reached the hospital's chapel. The chapel was a small, quiet space tucked away on the ground floor, filled with soft lighting and rows of wooden pews. The tiger stepped inside and sat at the altar, its head bowed as if in prayer. Emily hesitated in the doorway, overwhelmed by a wave of emotion she couldn't explain. The sight of this majestic creature in such a sacred space felt otherworldly, as though she were witnessing something far beyond human comprehension. Liam arrived moments later, his radio crackling with updates about Animal Control's arrival. "Emily," he whispered urgently, "they're here. We have to act now." But Emily couldn't move. The tiger's eyes met hers once again, and for a fleeting moment she swore she felt something pass between them, an unspoken message, a plea for trust. The chapel was bathed in a warm golden light, the faint glow of sunrise streaming through the stained glass windows. The tiger sat unmoving at the altar, its massive body still yet commanding an inexplicable sense of presence. Emily stood frozen in the doorway, torn between her instincts as a doctor, her fear of the unknown, and the undeniable pull she felt to trust this mysterious creature. Behind her, Liam's radio buzzed insistently, signaling the arrival of Animal Control just outside the hospital. "Dr. Carter," Liam whispered, his voice tight with urgency. "We have to move. Now. If Animal Control gets in here, they'll tranquilize it, and who knows what could happen next." Emily turned to Liam, her heart hammering in her chest. I don't think we should stop it, Liam," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "I think it's here for a reason." Liam stared at her, as if she'd lost her mind. "Emily, it's a tiger in a hospital. This isn't some fairy tale. We don't know what it's capable of." But before Emily could respond, a small, trembling voice cut through the tension. "Dr. Carter?" She spun around to see Oliver standing in the doorway, his IV pole rattling slightly as he leaned on it for support. His hospital gown hung loose on his frail frame, and his lips were tinged with the faintest hint of blue. He looked impossibly fragile, yet there was a determined glint in his eyes that stopped Emily in her tracks. "Oliver," she gasped, rushing to his side. "You shouldn't be out of bed. You're too weak." "I had to come," Oliver interrupted, his voice soft but resolute. His gaze was fixed on the tiger, his expression one of wonder rather than fear. "He's waiting for me." Emily's heart clenched. "Oliver, you need to rest," she pleaded, crouching down to his level. "Please, let me take you back to your room." But the boy shook his head. "No," he whispered. "I need to see him. He came all this way for me." Before Emily could stop him, Oliver let go of the IV pole and took a shaky step toward the tiger. Emily reached out to steady him, but he gently pushed her hand away. The tiger watched intently, its amber eyes fixed on the boy as he approached. Despite its immense size and power, it remained completely still, as though it understood the fragility of the child before it. "Oliver." Emily's voice broke as she watched the boy take another step, then another, until he was standing directly in front of the tiger. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. The entire chapel was silent, the tension so thick it was almost suffocating. Then, slowly, the tiger lowered its massive head until it was level with Oliver's. The boy reached out a trembling hand, his thin fingers brushing against the tiger's fur. A collective gasp escaped from everyone present. Emily, Liam, the hospital staff who had followed at a distance, even the animal control officers who had just entered the chapel. No one dared to move. Oliver smiled, a radiant, unguarded smile that lit up his pale face. "You're soft," he whispered, his voice filled with awe. The tiger let out a deep, resonant purr, the sound reverberating through the room like a sacred hymn. It wasn't the sound of a predator. It was something gentler, almost tender. Emily felt tears spill down her cheeks. She couldn't explain what she was witnessing. None of it made sense, but in that moment, logic didn't matter. All that mattered was the connection between the boy and the tiger, a connection that transcended anything she had ever known. Suddenly, the spell was broken by the crackle of Liam's radio. "We're ready to move in," came the voice of the lead animal control officer. "Do you have eyes on the animal?" Liam turned to Emily, his face a mask of conflict. "What do we do?" he whispered. "If they try to take it now, they'll probably hurt it." Emily hesitated, her mind racing. The tiger wasn't behaving aggressively, but there was no guarantee that it would stay calm if threatened. And yet, she couldn't shake the feeling that intervening now would be wrong, like interrupting something sacred. "Wait," she said finally, her voice firm. "Just wait." The officer's voice crackled again. "We don't have time to wait. This is a wild animal, and we need to neutralize the threat." "It's not a threat," Emily said, her voice rising. "Please, just give us a little more time." Liam raised his hands to the radio. "Stand down for now," he said, his voice steady but commanding. "I repeat, stand down. We'll handle this." There was a tense pause on the other end before the officer begrudgingly replied, "You've got 5 minutes. After that, we're coming in." Meanwhile, Oliver had lowered himself to sit cross-legged on the floor, his hand still resting on the tiger's fur. "Dr. Carter," he said softly, not looking up. "Do you hear it?" Emily blinked, wiping at her tears. "Hear what, sweetheart?" she asked. "The music," Oliver replied. "It's beautiful." Emily frowned. The chapel was silent, save for the sound of the tiger's deep purring. But Oliver's face was serene, his eyes half closed as though he were hearing something no one else could. He looked at peace. And then, for the first time in what felt like forever, Oliver spoke with complete clarity. "He says it's okay to go now," he whispered, "that I don't have to be scared anymore." Emily felt a sob rise in her throat. "Oliver," she began, her voice trembling, "you're not going anywhere. We're still fighting, remember?" But Oliver turned to her, his eyes shining with a wisdom far beyond his years. "You've fought enough for me, Dr. Carter," he said gently. "You can rest now. I'll be okay. He'll take care of me." The words hit her like a tidal wave, and she broke down, her knees buckling as she sank to the floor. This wasn't supposed to happen. She wasn't supposed to let go. But deep down, she knew Oliver was right. She had done everything she could, and now it was time to let him find peace. The tiger stood, its enormous frame towering over the boy. It turned its head, looking directly at Emily one last time. In its gaze, she saw something she couldn't describe. Gratitude, perhaps, or an acknowledgement of her sacrifice. Then, with a gentle nudge of its massive head, the tiger coaxed Oliver to his feet. Oliver turned to Emily and smiled, his pale face glowing with a light she had never seen before. "Thank you," he said simply. Then, hand in hand with the tiger, he walked toward the stained glass windows. As the first rays of sunlight illuminated the chapel, the tiger and the boy seemed to dissolve into the light, their silhouettes fading until they were gone. The chapel was silent, as though the very air had been stolen from the room. The space where Oliver and the tiger had stood just moments before was empty, bathed in the golden light of the morning sun streaming through the stained glass windows. For a long time, no one spoke. Emily remained on her knees, her tear-streaked face tilted toward the now vacant altar. Liam stood frozen near the doorway, his radio crackling faintly in the background, forgotten in the wake of what they had just witnessed. "Where did they go?" whispered a nurse who had crept into the chapel during the commotion. Her voice trembled, her wide eyes scanning the room for any sign of the tiger or the boy. Emily couldn't answer. Her chest ached, torn between the crushing grief of Oliver's departure and the strange, inexplicable peace that had filled the chapel in its wake. She felt the warmth of it spreading through her, wrapping around her heart like a gentle embrace. It was as if Oliver had left something behind, a presence, a reassurance, a gift. Liam finally broke the silence. "That didn't just happen," he murmured, shaking his head as if trying to convince himself. "It couldn't have. Tigers don't vanish, and a kid can't just disappear. But Emily turned to him, her voice steady in a way she hadn't expected. It did happen, Liam. We all saw it. Her words hung in the air, quiet but resolute. And whatever it was, whatever the tiger was, it wasn't here to hurt anyone. It was here for Oliver. The hospital was in a state of stunned disbelief for the rest of the day. Word of the tiger's appearance spread like wildfire, reaching every corner of St. Andrews and beyond. Security footage showed the tiger walking through the hospital halls, its enormous frame moving with an uncanny calmness. But curiously, the footage ended just as it entered the chapel. There was no video evidence of what had happened inside. Animal control, baffled by the entire ordeal, eventually packed up and left without explanation. "There's no tiger here anymore," one officer muttered as he loaded his tranquilizer gun into the truck. "And I'm not even sure there was one to begin with." Emily returned to Oliver's room later that day, her heart heavy with the knowledge that she would never see him again. But when she opened the door, she was met with a sight that took her breath away. His hospital bed was perfectly made, the sheets smooth and undisturbed. His toys and books were still neatly arranged on the bedside table, but there was no trace of the boy who had once occupied the space. It was as though he had never been there. A folded piece of paper lay on the pillow. Emily's hands shook as she picked it up and opened it. Inside was a simple drawing in crayon, Oliver's childlike depiction of a tiger with its tail curled protectively around a small boy. Beneath it, in shaky but unmistakable handwriting, were 3 words: "I am free." Tears streamed down Emily's face as she clutched the note to her chest. The heaviness that had burdened her for months began to lift, replaced by a sense of closure she hadn't thought possible. She sat down on the bed, the sunlight from the window warming her face, and allowed herself to cry, not out of despair, but out of gratitude for the time she had spent with Oliver, and for the peace he had finally found. In the days that followed, life at St. Andrews slowly returned to normal, though the tiger's visit left a lasting mark on everyone who had witnessed it. Some staff dismissed it as an elaborate hoax, while others whispered about miracles and divine intervention. But for Emily, there was no question. The tiger had been real, and its purpose had been far greater than anyone could comprehend. Liam stopped by Emily's office a week later, his usual gruff demeanor softened by the events of that morning. He placed a steaming cup of coffee on her desk and leaned against the doorway. "I still don't understand any of it," he admitted, shaking his head. "But I've been thinking about what you said, that it wasn't here to hurt anyone. I think you were right." Emily smiled faintly, her eyes drifting to the framed drawing that now sat on her desk. Oliver's crayon sketch of the tiger. "I don't think it was about us understanding it, Liam," she said. "Some things aren't meant to be explained, they're just meant to be felt." He nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Well, whatever it was, it changed things around here. I don't think any of us will ever look at this place the same way again." Months passed, and Emily found herself returning to the chapel often, drawn to the quiet sanctuary where she had said goodbye to Oliver. She would sit in the pews, sometimes alone and sometimes joined by patients or staff who had heard whispers of what had happened there. The chapel became a place of healing, not just for those seeking spiritual solace, but for those searching for meaning in the inexplicable. And then, one spring morning, Emily received a letter in the mail with no return address. Inside was a single photograph. Her breath caught as she stared at the image, a lush, green forest bathed in dappled sunlight. In the center of the photograph stood a tiger, its golden fur shimmering in the light. Curled at its feet was a small boy, his face partially obscured but unmistakably Oliver's. He looked happy, his body strong and healthy, his arms wrapped around the tiger's neck. Emily's hands trembled as she held the photograph, her heart swelling with a mixture of longing and joy. She didn't know who had sent it or how it had come to be, but she knew without a doubt that it was real. Oliver was safe. He was free. She placed the photograph beside the crayon drawing on her desk, a permanent reminder of the boy who had taught her to believe in the extraordinary. Months turned into years, but the memory of the tiger never faded. For Emily, it became a touchstone, a moment that changed not only how she approached her work, but how she lived her life. She carried Oliver's crayon drawing and the photograph of him with the tiger wherever she went, reminders of the extraordinary encounter that had taught her the most important lesson of all. Sometimes, the answers we seek aren't found in logic or science, but in trust, love, and the courage to let go. St. Andrew's Medical Center had also changed. The chapel, once rarely visited, became a place of quiet reflection for patients and staff alike. People began leaving small tokens in honor of Oliver and the tiger: flowers, children's drawings, and handwritten notes of gratitude for the hope the story had inspired. Though no one could fully explain what had happened that morning, the message was clear. Miracles, however fleeting, had a way of leaving ripples that extended far beyond their moment in time. For Emily, the tiger and Oliver's disappearance remained an unsolvable mystery, but it was a mystery she had come to embrace rather than fear. She no longer tried to explain it to others or even to herself. Instead, she let it guide her, serving as a reminder to cherish every life she touched, no matter how fleeting. One crisp autumn evening, Emily returned to the chapel. She sat in the back pew, her hands folded in her lap as the setting sun bathed the room in golden light. She closed her eyes, breathing in the stillness, and in that quiet moment, she thought she heard it, the deep, resonant purr of the tiger echoing faintly in her memory. A smile spread across her face, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling with gratitude. Whether it was to Oliver, the tiger, or something far greater than herself, she wasn't sure. But the words felt right, like a prayer answered before it had even been spoken. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the chapel in a soft, warm glow, Emily knew one thing with absolute certainty: some bonds, no matter how unlikely, no matter how brief, could never be broken. The story of the tiger and the boy reminds us that life is filled with moments that defy understanding. These moments challenge us to step beyond what we know, to trust in the unseen, and to open our hearts to possibilities we cannot explain. Oliver's journey was one of peace and freedom, and though it ended in loss, it also left behind a legacy of hope. For those who have ever struggled with letting go, for those who have ever doubted the presence of light in the darkest moments, this story offers a quiet truth. Love transcends boundaries. Whether it's between a doctor and her patient, a child and a mysterious tiger, or a soul and the unknown, love has the power to transform, heal, and endure. And sometimes in the face of life's greatest mysteries, all we need to do is believe.